Hello, America, and welcome to a flashback in time. I'm your host, Lindsay Thompson. Today we have some very interesting guests who witnessed battle firsthand back in 1898. Please welcome the fearless man himself, Teddy Roosevelt, accompanied by his fellow Rough Riders.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hey, guys.
Long time no see.
Oh, I know, girl. How you been?
Thank you so much for allowing us to come onto your show and discuss some key events in Spanish American War. These are two of my men, Red and Buck.
Hey, guys. Well, I'm so lucky to have you guys here in studio with me. Let's dive right in, shall we? Teddy Roosevelt, how was it being an idol for these men and leading a voluntary group in battle? I mean, it had to be somewhat stressful dealing with men that weren't very experienced.
Yeah, it was very stressful and honestly a tad overwhelming, but the men surprised me and they were hard workers and determined to learn the ways of battle. They caught on very quickly and got the hang of being in war.
What about you, Red? How was it being in war?
It was not what I expected when I volunteered. I thought war was going to be filled with violence and deaths. And while there was a lot of fighting, we had minimal casualties. I believe only around 350 people died, with over 1,000 wounded. Compared to the Spanish, however, they ended up losing around 60,000 men from both disease and battle.
Wow. Anything you'd like to add to that, Buck?
Yes, disease was a major problem on the war front. The U.S. had around 3,000 men die from malaria, yellow fever, dysentery, and other fatal diseases. The chances of getting these diseases were pretty likely, but once we noticed it was a huge problem, we called the doctors and sent those exposed away to Manitowoc. Actually, fighting was different than I expected too.
It was.
When it came to joining the war, I did not expect to go from battle to battle, but we truly had no idea what we were signing up for.
I'm sure when you joined the war, you had certain expectations, and I'm so sorry those couldn't be met.
They weren't.
Okay. Well, Mr. Roosevelt, I bet you didn't expect so much death from disease either. So tell me, what happened before the war and the lasting effect it had on you?
This was definitely a pivotal point in my political career. When war broke out with Spain in April of that year, I was serving as an assistant secretary of the Navy. So I quit my position, thank God, and helped form the Regiment of Volunteers. The Rough Riders enlisted cowboys and college men, like these two right here. There was only one real day of fighting, however, but that was when we lost most of our men in battle. My actions during the battle earned me a recommendation for the Congressional Medal of Honor, but political differences got in the way. Sadly, this devastated me. Lucky for me, though, the battle of Town on Hill propelled my political career, and with me becoming governor of New York in 1899, then later vice president in McKinley, and then later president in 1900.
Oh, wow. It's so great to know where you started, Theodore. Rough Riders, were you scared to fight the Spanish? I mean, it must have been dramatic going into your first battle.
It sure was. Honestly, I was so scared I had no idea what to expect in battle because the whole experience thus far was nothing like I imagined. In the confusion surrounding the departure from Tampa, half the members of the Rough Riders were left behind along with their horses. So we were only half of what we should be. In Battle of San Juan Hill, which took place July 1st, 1898, we stormed the hill by foot accompanied by the cavalry of black men. We were the first uphill.
Yeah, and as the Rough Riders were on foot running up the hill, I was guiding them while on horseback. My horse, Texas, was a massive war horse who wanted to win just as much as I did. I encouraged my men to march with pride and honor, holding the American flag high overhead.
Yes, and when the first shots were fired, I felt pure exhilaration and excitement, but also a feeling of fear. I prayed that I would not die. I could not die. I was just a young boy. with a bright future ahead of me. I did not want to let my country down. We had to be victorious. Troops began to drop from heat exhaustion as we were under continuous fire. We went from Kettle Hill to San Juan Hill. We went down the western side of Kettle Hill and begun ascending up San Juan Hill up the northern side, where Teddy told us to march with pride. As we stopped to set up our guns, the Spanish commenced a counterattack on the heights of the hill. The counterattack was obviously not successful.
Unfortunately, the attack on Kettle Hill was far more worse than the Battle of San Juan Hill. Those men faced a more serious attack. In the end, the Spanish were fierce fighters, but obviously we were better.
That's some nationalism right there, ladies and gentlemen. But what happened after the Battle of San Juan Hill?
Well, on July 16th, the Spaniards agreed to the unconditional surrender of 23,500 troops around the city. In the end, though, the war had cost the United States $250 million and around 3,000 lives, of whom 90% had perished from infectious diseases. McKinley, who was president at the time, was very pleased with the outcome, though.
That's incredible that so many people died from disease. Rest in peace to those who lost their lives fighting for our country. Back to the questions. What was the island of Cuba like?
Well, the population consisted of approximately 430,000 slaves. 60% of the population was black or mulatto. The war was overall provoked by the word of the Spanish colonial brutality in Cuba. Although the war was largely brought about the U.S. efforts, expansionists, many Americans, including us Rough Riders, supported the idea of freeing the oppressed people controlled by the Spanish.
That is 100% correct. We were not only there to help the U.S., but to set those enslaved free, or as free as we can manage them. Carrying on with your question, Cuba was like a paradise. Moderate weather, with it being a tropical island. But when we were more inland, things changed. We saw people in poverty, people getting taken advantage of.
That must have been a heartbreaking sight.
It was.
Calm down, bud.
Okay. The island does look beautiful. It's okay. The island does look beautiful. Thank goodness that Cuba is nowhere like that today.
Yes, that's why it was so important for us to become victorious.
Here's my last and final question. What happened at the end of the war?
The Spanish-American War had lasted only a few months and was over when Spain signed a peace treaty giving us, the United States, control over Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippine Islands, and Guam.
Wow, America was greatly rewarded for that victory. Thank you guys so much for joining me on my show and letting us all in on that little bit of history. It was so great meeting you guys. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
USA! USA! USA!